Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our virtual town hall on the Trent Lands Nature Areas plan. My name is Julie Davis. I'm the Vice President of External Relations and Advancement at Trent, and I'm the executive sponsor of the Trent Lands Nature Areas plan. I'd firstly like to respectfully acknowledge that Trent University is located on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. We began our work on this plan with a ceremony to ask the land for permission to engage in this planning process and have been guided by protocol and ceremony throughout our work. We offer our gratitude to the elders and knowledge keepers who have provided this guidance, members of the Mississauga community and Indigenous people at Trent and in this region who have shared their teachings and knowledge about the earth so we can be good stewards of the land together. Before we get started, I want to give you a quick rundown of how today's town hall will work. I will introduce the consultants who have created the plan, and rather than simply review the documents that I expect most of you have read, they will speak to the key goals of the plan and how the initiatives and actions within the plan achieve those goals. After the presentation, we'll open the floor to questions. Thank you to those who have submitted questions in advance. We've received quite a few, and we'll start with those. The Q&A feature at the bottom middle of your screen is enabled, and you can add your questions at any point throughout the presentation. We'll work our way through as many of those as we can, and then we will open up for live questions. At that point, if you want to ask a question, please use the raise your hand feature to get into the queue to ask your question live. We'll turn your microphone on at that time. We are recording the presentation, so it can be available for others to view at a later time. We will also add all the questions and answers from this session to the website, so they are there for everyone to review. And the discussion we have today will form part of the Phase 3 engagement report. So at this point, I'd like to introduce the consulting team for the Trent Lands Nature Areas plan, who will be leading the presentation. They're all magically appearing on the screen, and we'll move to the next slide. There we go. Great. So Lena Aldajani is an associate planner with SVN Architects and Planners and is the project lead, bringing together the background research, input from phase 1 and 2, and the environmental studies together to create the draft plan, framework, and guiding principles. Bob Goulet is the principal of Nibissing Consulting. He has led Indigenous engagement on the plan and has facilitated the gathering of Indigenous traditional knowledge and ensured that Indigenous values were present throughout the plan. Kristen Harrison is a principal with North-South Environmental. Kristen has been the lead on collecting environmental information from both primary and secondary sources to compile the Natural Heritage Report. She drafted the Nature Area Stewardship Plan and collaborated on the final report. Shonda Wang is principal with SVN Architects and Planners and has led the precedent research and in-person engagements, and she will be our moderator for the question and answer section. Now, quite rightly, there's a lot of interest in this plan, both from those concerned that the beautiful and vital natural environment at Trent is protected and supported, as well as those who want to see Trent address the city's housing crisis, resolve safety and transportation issues around the campus, and help our university and region emerge from this pandemic stronger. Trent is an anchor institution in this region, and we must lead in all these areas. Developing the plan has been an ambitious undertaking. We spent many months seeking advice on how to proceed before we even started. Our goal has been to demonstrate how we can protect the environment and advance Trent and the community. Thank you all for your input and participation in creating the plan and for joining us today. I'll now pass the floor over to Lena, Kristen, and Bob, who will lead the presentation.
Thanks, Julie, for the warm introduction, and hi, everyone. I'm pleased to be here with you all virtually today and share some of the highlights of the plan, listen to your comments and your questions. I hope you're all keeping healthy and safe during this time. As a reminder to all, we've already completed phase 1 and phase 2 of the Trent Lands Nature Areas plan, the findings of which are detailed in the phase 1 background report and the Natural Heritage Report through engagement summary reports as well, that are all available on the Trent website. We have since integrated the findings from these 2 phases into the draft of the Trent Lands and Nature Areas plan, which is the focus of our meeting today. We are collecting feedback on this draft through to January 4th, at which point we'll refine the plan and issue the final for board approval. So the Trent Lands and Nature Areas plan takes on a new approach to campus planning. It is a comprehensive and one source plan. It's integrated, and while previous studies and plans focused on either the environment or development initiatives, the Trent Lands and Nature Areas plan integrates the ecological resilience, Indigenous values, campus and community infrastructure, and other objectives as part of a single vision for the path forward. It's based on study that exceeds the standards for most planning exercises. The plan is a significant document, and it will serve a variety of purposes. It will guide Trent to make informed decisions to ensure the campus is engaging, the natural environment is protected and enhanced, and that expectations are clear and set for sustainable development. It will also provide inputs for long-range planning to the city, county, and adjacent municipalities. Finally, it will also articulate a clear vision and set of ideas that will serve to communicate Trent's aspirations and path forward to prospective faculty and students and potential investors. So in an effort to focus on key areas of interest, we'll be presenting 6 highlighted aspects of the plan, as you see on my screen. We understand that the Trent Lands plan integrates quite a bit of information, and we're happy to take your questions following this presentation. So I'll dive right into the background study and the engagement component. This is essentially a summary of the work completed during phase 1 and phase 2. And in phase 1, we completed a number of studies to ensure that we had a good, clear understanding of the existing conditions today and any identified needs. Throughout phase 1 and phase 2, we've engaged with the campus community and Indigenous communities. And then through phase 2 primarily, but throughout the duration of the project, we've looked to global inspiration and precedent to truly understand what it means to be a leader through the Trent Lands plan. Throughout the phase 1 study, we were able to identify a long list of needs and considerations for the campus, our local communities, and the province and nationally. We know that the student population on campus has increased by about 27% over the last 5 years. Academic spaces and housing on campus are at capacity. Pedestrian and cyclist safety is being compromised. At the same time, Peterborough as a city is the fastest growing metropolitan area in Canada. It is experiencing a lack of affordable housing, rental, student and long-term care facilities, and unemployment rates are at a high. These pressures are taking place in light of a climate emergency. Municipal, provincial, and federal governments are all investing in issuing plans to deal with the growth pressures, housing shortages, protection of significant habitat and species at risk, and upgrades to infrastructure. So how do we bring this all together in one plan? The campus today is evolving, and thoughtful planning is needed to guide its evolution in a clear and aspirational direction. The university is known for its land-based research and learning, and wishes to continue to foster opportunities for students and for research. So changes to feature limits, archaeological findings, and infrastructure requirements have had an impact on the framework plan since the previous planning exercises. An example of which, through a review of the Clean Tech Commons application, we also identified, or the university and city also identified through a review by the Ministry of Transportation, that a land reserve for a potential future extension of Highway 115 along 9th Line was required, and that's shown along the 9th Line on the east edge of campus. What this means to Trent is that Trent, while the reserve is in place, Trent will no longer be able to locate any permanent infrastructure. This has had an impact on the configuration of the Clean Tech Commons site, which has had some ripple effect on farm and other aspects on the land. Additionally, a preliminary review of the natural features and habitats and archaeological assets have necessitated a review of suitability of lands previously designated for development. This preliminary review has been incorporated into the draft Trent Lands and Nature Areas plan. The natural heritage characterization that was undertaken for the plan included 4-season study on previously designated development parcels, and through secondary source information in the Trent Nature Areas. Indigenous traditional knowledge was woven into methods of study, and it informed our findings in an integrated approach with Indigenous traditional knowledge and values alongside Western science. This level of study exceeds typical planning requirements at the master plan or framework stage. To date, through phase 1 and phase 2, there's been numerous opportunities for engagement with a range of audiences, including campus faculty, staff and students, community leaders, municipal governments and regulatory authorities, advisory committees and campus administrations, donors and partners, and the Mississauga consultation officers and Trent Elders and Knowledge Keepers Council. So far, since making the plan available in October alone, we've had a number of focus group meetings and received over 131 comments through the Trent website, and these conversations are ongoing. Trent University has given specific focus on listening to the voices of Indigenous people through this process. The Mississauga rights holders have been active participants in the preparation of the concepts that are presented in this plan, and leaders from Curve Lake First Nation and Hiawatha First Nation have been involved through the consultation officers. The Trent Elders and Traditional Knowledge Keepers Council is an advisory group for Indigenous engagement, and they've been involved as well through updates of the Trent Lands and Nature Areas plan. Indigenous traditional knowledge, as I've mentioned, has been used alongside Western knowledge to inform different portions of the plan, and we've used the symbol that's indicated on the screen throughout the Trent Lands and Nature Areas plan to indicate any contributions from Indigenous voices and wisdom. A dialogue with a broader Indigenous community has also been integrated through this process. Some of the key messages we've heard from the larger community and from campus and students was that people look to Trent to be a global example of experiential learning, teaching, research, environmental stewardship, and they felt that it was necessary to tell the story of the land. Nature is very clearly at the core of Trent's identity, and so preservation and stewardship of the university's natural assets is a priority as the university grows. The Trent Lands and Nature Areas plan has been a valuable exercise, and it has really necessitated involvement with a variety of groups, some of which I've mentioned already, and that there's a real desire to have a sustainable food future on campus, with food production being an active component of both campus and the curriculum. There's also been a communicated desire for housing facilities, employment, and other amenities, including grocery stores, convenience stores, or healthcare clinics for students and faculty and staff, and for the community at large to support activities on campus. There's a short list that summarizes some of the repeat initiatives that we've heard were desirable for the Trent Lands throughout this engagement process, over here on the right. We also know that climate change is a reality and it's impacting the world at large. The UN has developed sustainable development goals that have been a key inspiration and benchmark tool in developing the Trent Lands and Nature Areas plan. Many of the sustainable development goals are relevant to the plan, including access to affordable housing, zero hunger, quality education, climate action, social equity, and biodiversity, both on land and in the water. We've looked to global examples and some Canadian examples as precedents for resilience from an environmental, social, and economic standpoint. And we've also, we've studied many ways that we could continue to foster a relationship and this triple bottom line sustainable approach. And with that, I will pass this on to Kristen, who will go over our vision for environmental preservation and stewardship.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here, and I appreciate having everyone's attention and time for a little while. All right, we can move on to the next slide there, Lena. Oh, I think this is actually still some of Lena's content, actually.
Yes, sorry about that. I think
that's okay.
Got a little bit confused there. Yes, sorry. So we've pulled together a vision that brings together both environment and community. And so we heard from the public during our last engagement that the vision is a good one, but that there needed to be a bit more clarity on what sustainability truly meant. And Trent really does aspire to demonstrate leadership in environmental education and stewardship, respect for Indigenous traditional knowledge, and integration of both the natural and built environment. And we've supplemented this vision with a set of guiding principles that speak more directly to the core mission of the university as a teaching and learning institute, and the 3 pillars of environmental resilience, economic resilience, and social resilience. And this is the image that you will have seen by now, I'm sure, of the framework plan. I won't get into this in detail now, and I think as Kristen goes through the next steps and we come back to other highlights of the plan, we'll be able to shed some light on some of the details. So on to you, Kristen. Sorry about that.
That's okay. All right. Hi, everyone. For my part in the presentation, I'm going to be walking through both some of the elements that have been foundational to the plan in terms of natural heritage, as well as some key highlights from the Nature Areas Stewardship Plan, so that we can really help to illustrate and identify how those pieces have informed the broader plan. And then hopefully we can take some questions on those elements a little bit later. The Otonabee River is a central and grounding feature within the Simons campus. Its presence and importance to the university has been recognized since the Rom-Tom Plan, which identified it as a central defining feature of the campus. In the 2020 TLNAP, or plan, the river continues to be a centrally important structural element. New to the 2020 plan, however, is a recognition and integration of the river and more broadly the watershed and its role of this within surface water and groundwater systems that help define and support the landscape and features, including natural heritage features, across the Simons campus. The river remains a central element, and contributing elements to it include wetlands, watercourses, and other features and areas. Those are brought forward through the plan, both as a recognition of the interactions between natural heritage and water resource, but also as features that add value both aesthetically and functionally to the university. Watersheds are recognized as an important unit, both for protecting, but also for planning, and as a functional unit for considering hydrologic and ecological functions. I'm sure everyone is aware of watershed planning and using that as a way to help describe the natural environment, but also as an important level at which we should be considering different elements. Trent, being a major landholder, should also have regard for this, and this has been considered through the plan. Features and areas within the watershed, the Otonabee, the Trent Severn, watercourses, drainage features, and wetlands are recognized as providing ecological services and functions, and that these are critical to preserving biodiversity and resilience to change, including climate change. Those include form and function items and water quality, water quantity control through wetlands as a response to larger storms or more frequent larger storms that we may see through climate change. Nutrient cycling and productivity as core fundamental building blocks to much of our biodiversity and habitats, fish and wildlife habitat itself and having diversity and opportunities there, as well as the vegetation, wildlife, and general biodiversity that we're going to see across those groups. Trent is continuing to stay engaged with the City of Peterborough Watershed Plan and supports the vision of a healthy and resilient watershed that protects, sustains, and enhances our evolving communities. Trent recognizes the role of the features across the campus and is supporting this objective. One of the key elements that was brought forward in the 2020 plan was a systems-based approach to natural heritage planning within the land use planning framework. The UGN is a conceptual system intended to demonstrate Trent's commitment to maintaining 60% of Simon's campus as natural areas and green spaces. As a systems-based approach, it brings in concepts of connectivity by identifying corridors between natural features, and these can be seen on the plan on the screen, as well as identifying opportunities for improvements from existing conditions. Those would include areas such as the safe wildlife crossing areas. We've highlighted some areas that were brought forward as concerns through the work that was done, so that those can be considered through planning processes, including needed integration with the city, where there's infrastructure that's managed by the city itself. Moving beyond just looking at natural features, however, the UGN looks beyond those into areas which provide supportive benefits to hydrology or biodiversity as part of broader objectives for sustainable or regenerative planning and development across campus. This includes moving the experimental farm to be coincident with the UGN and largely within the wildlife sanctuary nature area on existing agricultural lands, so that there's a long-term viable location, and also as a way to align opportunities between natural spaces and agricultural practices that are moving towards more regenerative opportunities. Opportunities for enhancement and restoration are also important components of the UGN. Much of this effort will be focused within the nature areas as an important area that's being managed and stewarded specifically for those objectives. But there will be also opportunities that should be explored and will be explored across campus, including introduction of smaller areas across campus, also using areas such as sports fields or green quads as providing additional supports and benefits more broadly. One other one to highlight on the plan here is that cultural meadow community. There's as I'm sure everyone is aware, there's a very large corridor for Hydro 1 that runs across the campus. There's a real opportunity to consider this area for restoration. Having a cultural meadow community is it works with the requirements of having access and not having very trees and other things within the hydro corridor. So that's an opportunity to capitalize on that area and use it for ecological benefit. Through its approach and broader objectives, the UGN provides opportunities for innovation and research as well. And we want to encourage and integrate elements on campus that might be able to be extrapolated and used elsewhere, so that Trent can continue to be a leader in identifying opportunities and ways to introduce biodiversity in built form areas as well. We do want to highlight a key difference so that it's clear for everybody here, as well as identifying how the UGN has a more expanded objective or set of goals than necessarily a natural heritage system does. A natural heritage system is driven by policy. It identifies significant features, be they identified as provincially significant through criteria, as well as those that would be important within a municipal context. Those are driven by the provincial policy statement, and municipalities are required to identify those. In the case for Trent University and within Peterborough, that system will be defined by the city, and currently that work is in progress as part of the official plan preparation. Where the NHS is still a conceptual system, the boundaries will be confirmed through detailed planning stages, but they really are driven and defined largely by the existing natural heritage features. This can include areas such as significant woodlands, significant wetlands, significant wildlife habitat, and habitat for species of risk, among others. The University Green Network, although there is a lot of alignment between it and a natural heritage system, we want to make sure that it's clear that this is not intended to replace the policy-driven process that's required of the municipality. And it also serves an expanded purpose. It's intended to capture additional areas that link both hydrology and ecology, as well as considering opportunities to provide a net benefit beyond the scope of what a natural heritage system can achieve. Consistent with an NHS, the UGN is a conceptual system, but it is still systems-based in that it considers the connections and corridors between features and areas. We've used a different nomenclature to help illustrate the difference and ensure that there's a distinction between those two. We want to consider them as diverse spaces, looking at not just natural heritage areas and features, but also looking beyond them, including small biodiversity opportunities and enhancements within the campus itself. The UGN is intended to establish a robust and connected system. We're also looking at opportunities through all those different land use types and areas that will provide a net benefit to the system. We can speak a little bit about the different components that make up the UGN. When we look at features, largely we're considering wetlands, woodlands, open country habitats, which includes things like cultural meadows, thickets, those types of areas. And those are largely what comprise the nature areas, although there are other land use types within them. There's the connecting corridors. We recognize that there are also components of agriculture. Then there's interrelationships between natural heritage and agriculture that we want to recognize. We've got natural green spaces, as we spoke about. Those can include areas such as pollinator gardens, pocket forests, those types of areas. And we've also got manicured quads and fields. And although those aren't natural in aspect, they're still permeable landscapes. So there's hydrologic benefits that can be supportive to the broader system. We've spoken or mentioned the nature areas, and that's a key area of interest for many people. We recognize the value of those to Trent University and the purpose that they have served. They were originally identified before the policy really was there to support the identification of significant areas. So it was an innovative approach that Trent brought forward at the time that they were created. Through the lands plan process, we undertook a review of boundaries of the nature areas to update them based on current information, which largely focused on where are their natural heritage features and ensuring that the nature area boundaries reflected where those feature limits were. We want to note that the baseline for doing this work was based on the status of the Trent nature areas at the time that the lands plan was initiated. So that was our baseline for everything that's presented here. Through the review process, approximately 13 hectares has been added to the nature areas. Those are shown as dark green on your screen. And these include incorporation of numerous areas or parcels that through former plans were identified as development areas, but really they are areas that currently hold natural areas, so they've been recommended for incorporation into the nature areas. To highlight a few, within the wildlife sanctuary, there are some additions along Pioneer Road to the east of Camp Kawartha, as well as south along University Drive. There's a square parcel there that's been added. For Lock 22 nature area along Water Street, we've expanded it to capture that entire area there, really reflecting what the feature limits look like in that location. There have also been additions to Promise Rock Nature Area, which is comprised, that's an area of significant wildlife habitat that was confirmed through the work, as well as additions to the Wetland Complex Nature Area and 9th Line, some of which are to reflect existing areas, as well as just rounding out some of the features and areas. We do note that there are a few areas that are pending further assessment, either to be added or potentially to be removed from the nature areas. Those boundaries are really needing some additional study to confirm whether or not those recommendations will proceed. And those would be done through future study and confirmed after completion of the plan. You can skip to the next slide there, Lena. Perfect. I'm going to get into the Nature Area Stewardship Plan a little bit from this slide forward. The lands plan provided an opportunity to update and align land use planning across campus, bringing both natural heritage management and planning, as well as looking at land planning. Really, those two pieces should be integrated, and this plan brings those two components together. Updates to the Nature Area Stewardship Plan were done in collaboration with the Nature Area Stewardship Advisory Committee. We received a lot of valuable insight, knowledge, and we wish to thank them for their advice, input, and review that they have provided so far. And we look forward to continued engagement as we finalize the process. Goals for the nature areas. were updated from the 2002 plan. The 2002 plan provided a lot of great information, but we wanted to bring those forward now that it's been 18 years and make sure that they really resounded with the direction of the university, were reflective of current policy direction, as well as thinking forward and drawing in items of climate change, and as well as Indigenous traditional knowledge, my apologies, to ensure that those were reflected as well. The values that are presented here were considered both in generation of the goals, but also to ensure that there was a reflection of these values across multiple goals, so that we could achieve and ensure that they connected back to that component. The goals fit into 5 values, which is biodiversity and ecological services, natural heritage and landform, nature-based learning, Indigenous traditional knowledge, well-being and recreation, and those are represented in that circle. The lines that surround them link back to the goals that are presented there, and this information is also presented in the stewardship plan itself, so you can have a detailed look there if you wish. Many of the goals are really intended to provide a well-balanced approach to management of the nature areas. Sorry, Lena, I confused you there. In terms of looking forward for management, again, we turned to and reviewed the 2002 plan, and then looked to update and modernize some of the approach to focus on management. We've identified and proposed 4 management categories. And they have a specific focus around what they are intended to do. We wanted to ensure that there was a balance between ecological values and objectives, but still providing those opportunities for experiential learning and nature-based learning. Recreation has, since the nature areas were established, has been a key component as well. So we wanted to make sure that all of those elements came into the stewardship plan. Ecological reserve, these areas are largely the most sensitive and or representative features and habitats within the Trent Lands. The focus of this management category is on biodiversity and natural processes. You'll see there's levels of intensity that are presented there. Those really represent the scope or scale of what that activity might look like, and you can see them reflected through all of the different management categories. There's very limited active management within the ecological reserve category, and really the intention there is to allow natural processes to occur. Conservation areas are still natural areas and features and intended to be maintained as such. There's still a focus on biodiversity, but there's an increased level of use and potential access, so you'll see recreation is more intense. And portions may have more active management. So there may be something like active management of meadows to make sure that those are retained on the landscape in the long term. Or there might be trail maintenance or trail construction sited appropriately for the area. Cultural areas are areas of cultural interest that we want to highlight and are managed for that purpose. These may include, these may be maintained so that that focus can be highlighted in the management, as well as for users to enjoy or be able to access those cultural areas. The intention here is that they're maintained in a way that is supportive of the broader objective around natural areas and biodiversity. Agricultural areas recognize existing agricultural fields present in the nature areas and allow them to continue as a complementary use. These represent an update to the 2002 plan, which had zoning. Just quickly to maybe align those two pieces for everyone. Under the 2002 plan, the zoning was nature reserve, natural environment, cultural environment, recreation, facility, transition, and special management. Nature reserve really aligns very well with ecological reserve. Those are very comparable. Natural environment from the 2002 plan is split between ecological reserve and conservation area. So we've really, those are still captured. There's still an intent to have those there, but that's where those two parts might be parsed out slightly. Cultural environment, there's almost exact alignment between cultural area and cultural environment. And in the case of special management, agricultural areas was really the focus of that. So again, we've just carried that forward with some updated direction. For recreation and facility, those are embedded within the different management categories that have been proposed for the 2020 plan. But again, direction in terms of where those would be appropriate and the scope or scale of those, it has to be in alignment with the direction of those management categories. Transition or successional areas, so those are captured through these 4 management categories that are presented here as well. One piece that was not carried forward was classification as Class A or Class B, which was based on significance. Really, that's addressed through policy and through a natural heritage system. So those have not been carried forward in the current plan. The plan also strives to provide actionable items, provides direction for stewardship so that it can be really a launching pad to move things forward as funding and opportunities present themselves. We focused targets to 5 areas, and again, these will develop over time and additional targets may be added as these are achieved, but we're looking at maintaining or increasing biodiversity, increasing habitat diversity and quality, ensuring accessible nature, learning from nature to make sure it ties back to the university's objectives as an institution for higher learning. And the 5th one is to improve management of dog use. This was a rather hot topic in terms of conversation, both in terms of a love for use with their dogs and also the ecological concerns that come with dog use. So that, of course, although it may seem out of step with some of the others, was one that we felt was very important to touch on. Metrics are also presented so that there's a measurable opportunity to report back on and ensure that stewardship is moving forward in a direction that's desirable. You'll see here that there's also a reflection of ITK values and opportunities through those metrics. We wanted to ensure that not only was there consideration through the development of the plan, but in terms of actionable items that those were represented here as well. We're going to speak a little bit in terms of management and implementation, not just within the nature areas, but thinking more broadly as part of the UGN and across campus more broadly. One of the items that was raised through the UGN is an important piece for systems-based thinking is corridors. We wanted to, through the plan, present some illustrative concepts of what those might look like. And ensure that there was direction that could be taken and moved forward after completion of this plan to inform next steps. Here are 2 examples, just briefly. One is showing a paired terrestrial and watercourse corridor. Corridors are really intended to maintain or improve landscape permeability and movement in the long term. There's opportunities for net benefit over existing conditions where we're establishing natural cover where there is currently none. As well as in these function as well as habitat in and of themselves if designed properly. So there's some opportunities for net benefit through generation. The specific design will be based on what features are being connected as well as what features are present in the area and will be designed through more detailed site-specific studies to inform them. Another element that we feel is really highlighted well in the plan and is very, I think, really exciting through the plan is also the really nature inclusive design element in terms of the natural to built interface. There, as everyone on the call is aware, the Simons campus has a diverse range of habitats and areas that supports a lot of diversity, including numerous species at risk. And we recognize that not only is it important to the community, it's also important to Trent to move forward with design that also considers avoiding impacts that need to be mitigated. So these present not just a traditional approach through ecological buffers, but also consider more nature inclusive development through naturalized landscaping or non-traditional approaches, things like green roofs and other opportunities that will assist in that process. Establishment of ecological buffers and selection of size of buffers will be determined through site-specific study to ensure that they are in line with regulatory agency requirements and consider any design opportunities that can bring net benefit as well. In terms of a few precedents and some examples of what these could look like, The Trent Lands and Nature Areas plan supports and encourages integrating biodiversity across the Simons campus. And they form an important and innovative component for the UGN in general. The natural to built interface will provide an opportunity to design in ways that reduce the potential for impact, as well as integrating some mitigative elements right inside the design. Also an opportunity to explore and integrate biodiversity in the design itself through green roofs and increasing pollinator opportunities, really help to diversify what's going to be across campus. We want to ensure that Trent continues to maintain its vision as a leader for the environment, and this represents, we think, a core component of that as well. One other element that we touched on earlier was looking at integration of biodiversity across the Simons campus as part of the UGN, but outside of kind of traditional areas that we would consider as being natural heritage features. Examples include naturalized green spaces. So we have examples of pocket forests. There's some interesting literature that's coming out and research about the benefits of some of these opportunities. Although they're small scale, they provide stopover habitat. They can encourage small, whether small mammals or pollinator gardens that can encourage biodiverse insects and other opportunities such as that can be integrated across campus within the built form environment, but with a strong benefit towards at a landscape scale. If we have these dotting across, then we don't have just a natural feature area and a built form. We can look at a blended approach across campus as well. So I think this represents some exciting direction through the lands plan as well. All right, I think this is back to Lena. Oh, sorry, it's off to Bob, perhaps.
I think it's back to me, you're right. So thanks for that, Kristen, and I'll just keep going and talk about some of the learning environments and connected community opportunities that are highlighted in the plan. The plan speaks about 5 different districts, with the campus core being the academic focus and center of the university, shown here in red. And it also highlights an additional 4 districts: the Clean Tech Commons, which is one most here are aware of, the Peninsula Lands, shown here in the turquoise tone, a seniors village up in the northwest portion of the lands, and in orange, East Bank lands that are contemplated for a long-term kind of development opportunity. On this map here, highlighted or outlined in the black line work here, is currently serviceable areas, and so these are in the shorter term planning horizon. Anything beyond that is, it requires some additional study and infrastructure works that take it into a longer range in planning. Additionally, we've integrated a couple of spaces that have already been in our conversations with the Mississauga consultation officers, including a traditional teaching lodge and medicine garden, and some placemaking opportunities and signage in the Trent and Mississauga entrance rocks. Bob will speak more to those in the next section of this presentation. So through any of the development activities, as I've mentioned before, sustainable development has really been key, and so setting those expectations has been a priority of the plan. The sustainable design objectives of the UN are clearly linked through the Trent Lands and Nature Areas plan, and there's a really close parallel to the Indigenous traditional knowledge perspective in achieving a good life, doing no harm, and being inclusive and mindful of the collective and responsible to future generations. Sustainable design guidelines have been integrated and will guide future development on campus. And one example of such is the new forensics crime scene facility at Trent, which is Canada's first zero carbon building certified by the International Living Future Institute. It is Trent's objective to minimize impact on the environment through new development and design with foresight and adaptability in order to be able to serve both current and future generations. We'll go through some of the concepts in the different districts. Here, we're presenting a concept that reclaims the Nassau Mills Road along the eastern edge of the river, and it serves really a number of purposes. This is a proposal that we have put forth to the city and may take some time to execute, but it is in Trent's vision to relocate this road outside of the campus core. What this does is it serves to reconnect the natural features to the river. It provides safer pathways of connection for wildlife in the adjacent wetlands or in the wooded areas. It also could help to promote improvements to riparian habitats along the river's edge. And signage could be integrated along the river's edge to continue to contribute to the public's awareness of the impacts and response to climate change. We could reinstate the campus core is a pedestrianized and cycle-friendly core. It provides for safer access and transportation to students and faculty who experience the campus. And it would really encourage a more direct interaction with the river and improve physical and visual access to it. Currently, the Nassau Mills Bridge acts as a bit of a barrier for people who wish to get closer to this natural asset that is so central to the campus core. In working with the Mississauga First Nations as well, we've talked about this idea of integrating Indigenous markers to reflect some placemaking elements and some of the cultural values of the river to the Mississauga. The Seniors Village is another concept that we are presenting. In Peterborough, individuals who are over the age of 65 account for 20% of the regional population. With that, the Seniors Village presents an opportunity to address this dire need for aging and housing for the aging community. There's an opportunity to also integrate this with opportunities for research, teaching, and experiential learning for Trent Center for Aging and Society and the nursing and other programs. There could be also an opportunity to integrate some food and sensory gardens, learning interaction with students in different capacities, access to the natural features nearby, and access to different recreational opportunities. So it truly is an opportunity to connect the campus with the community. Clean Tech Commons is envisioned to become Canada's premier green technology research and innovation site. Its host companies and enterprises have an environmental focus, and they are really driven to push the boundaries of the clean technology, environmental services, and material sciences and biotechnology fields. Agri-foods and agribusinesses may also be integrated into this new facility. Trent has set aside 85 acres of land for the Clean Tech Commons to enable this vision, and it is a longer-term vision. And so partnership is a key part of that vision. The Clean Tech Commons Master Plan has more details about Clean Tech Commons, but of the 6 design principles that are in the Master Plan, we have carried through that the Clean Tech Commons must be integrated with Trent's main campus physically and visually and socially, and it needs to be well connected to the city, county, and region, and its impact is really intended to be global. The peninsula lands are intended to meet some of the housing shortfalls that I mentioned earlier in our presentation. The vision for these lands is to integrate a leading edge sustainable community that is designed both at a community scale and at a site scale with sustainable practices in mind and sustainable construction approaches. It can truly become a living lab of sustainable design. It is an opportunity for teaching and learning, and it is envisioned to be a mixed-use community, so it could house some of the students on campus. It could also be extended to house some of the community members, and it's well placed to support an independent and university-partnered food production program or integrated ecosystem services. The East Bank lands, as I've mentioned, are a long-term opportunity for revenue generation. Servicing and access to these lands is currently limited and must be resolved to unlock the lands. The district's adjacency to Clean Tech Commons would be a benefit to potential future employment opportunities. And we've had some conversations with the city about how these different opportunities might all come together through a more integrated mobility framework. And so Trent's mobility framework really focuses on safety and accessibility concerns, and it tries to put the pedestrian and cyclist first. We've had some conversations with the city about transit routing and opportunities to provide alternatives to transportation other than the vehicle. And there's really an intent to shift the focus away from the autonomous, from an independent vehicle to a more walkable, cycle-friendly campus with access to better transit services. Mobility as a service concepts have also been integrated to allow for some adaptability of the plan as technologies evolve and our options for commuting and moving from one place to another change. All of this would be unified through a complete street design that makes for a comfortable walking environment and comfortable streets for students, staff, and faculty, and members of the community to enjoy. As I previously mentioned, we talked about the university's proposal to remove Nassau Mills Road along the east bank. This is shown in the red line over here. The transportation route instead would rely on the purple north-south connection established from Pioneer Road to the north. Other changes in the transportation and infrastructure on campus reflect the city's current North End environmental assessment study. Currently, they reflect the preferred option, but we are still collaborating with the city on their findings, and some of this might change through the updated version to ensure that we are as aligned as possible with the city's plans. And with that, I'll ask Bob to speak to the plan's integration of Indigenous traditional knowledge and values.
All right, thanks very much, Lena. Bonjour ni ndoy maganaduk. Mjakwad Indigenous kas migazi and odem nibising ojibwe and Anishinaabe and Taganing ni ndonjaba. I want to welcome everyone and thank you all and give you a real hearty chimegwachindam for being here tonight, for learning about this plan and hearing about these concepts, which are really about improving not only how we use the land, but also protecting and stewarding the land into the future. And that's really what was first and foremost on the minds of so many Michasagig, Anishinaabe, and many other Indigenous people that provided their input into this process. And, you know, one of the things, I just answered a question for Chris on the online Q&A, that he talked about those cedars that were cut down along Pioneer Road. You know, one of the things that, you know, we received from that advice, and sometimes it was strongly worded advice, and maybe rightfully so, that you know, the university needs to better understand the perspectives of Indigenous people, better understand the perspectives of Michasagig, Anishinaabe. And there's reason for that, because, you know, how we understand the world is we understand that from the spirit worldview, that we are surrounded by spirit. And one of those 7 grandfathers we have is that, that humility to know our place in creation, that we should use our gifts, use our abilities, you know, all those things to better leave the environment the way, you know, it should be. And part of that commitment is this slide that you see here. At Trent University, through this plan and through all that input from the Knowledge Keepers, our Elders and Knowledge Keepers Council, the Michasagig First Nations, who we met with ongoing regularly, the leadership, you know, it was quite a great process of working with, you know, so many great knowledgeable people. And I want to thank all those Knowledge Keepers and those community members that provided their knowledge and their views. I really appreciate that. Out of all that input, we have seen this being adopted, these principles that are going to ensure the longevity of the Indigenous perspective and worldview into this plan. These 6 principles that we see here are going to be guiding principles for ongoing work and land use at Trent University. And we refer to this as Anishinaabe Niwakwa Win, which is that wisdom. Again, one of those 7 grandfather teachings, that wisdom that comes from, you know, the collective knowledge of our people. Number one, that first guiding principle is commitment to ongoing collaboration and reconciliation with First Nations rights holders and the broader Indigenous community. And those words we cannot take lightly. You know, reconciliation, again, are one of those words that it tends to be overused because people aren't putting action to them or spirit to them. So, you know, this is one of those things that we hope that the decision makers will continue to move forward in collaboration, in reconciliation. Number two, that ceremony and cultural protocols will continue to be accessible and respected in all areas of the Trent Lands Plan. All areas of the campus will be for ceremony and for cultural use. That's incredibly important. And including commitment to ongoing learning of our cultural ways. And Trent has, through this process, and again, sometimes those difficult lessons to learn, that, you know, it's important to learn about these cultural ways, to learn about the spirit. And there's a lot of great teachers to help with that. You know, guiding principle number three is exploring new and adequate locations and opportunities for traditional and ceremonial lands in collaboration with Indigenous peoples. And this is a really great one. You know, the spirit lands that we have, Menedowag-Ake, those at the current sweat lodge area where the sacred fire is. You know, it's a small area. And we heard that, you know, Indigenous folks, Mississauga, want to have a larger area in order to gather, to have traditional gatherings, to put up a traditional teaching lodge. And so this plan acknowledges that. So that's incredibly important and a great opportunity. Number four, and something that's really near and dear to my heart, is that Indigenous traditional knowledge will be considered in land use planning and decision making with regard to the Trent lands. And I've got a whole slide that's going to kind of detail the practical aspects of that. A couple other here is exploring opportunities for Indigenous commemoration and placemaking will be considered. So, you know, Trent University is an Indigenous place, an Indigenous space. So how do we make that more accessible, and, you know, how do we create that commemoration inclusiveness? And finally, you know, again, number six, but incredibly important, that environmental collaboration with Indigenous peoples that ensures the health and vitality of the natural environment, specifically the wetlands. That was number one in much of our environmental conversations we've had with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and also other areas of environmental and cultural heritage. So those are our guiding principles. So really happy to see these as part of the plan. Next slide, please. This one is incredibly important, the integration of our values with in relation to the water, Nibe. We know, and I do want to acknowledge that the teachings of water come from our Kwewa, come from women. They were given that voice to speak for that water. So I do want to acknowledge my aunties and my elders for that. That there's incredible significance to the Odanabi Zibe, the original name of the Otonabee River, that river that beats like a heart. It is central to this plan. It's central to, you know, what we need to look after. And it reminds us of that life. That water is always flowing to us, just like life is flowing to us from the spirit world. And we need to reinforce the importance of that water in sustaining all life, not just humankind, plant life, but all animals, all parts of creation. Humankind is just a small part of creation. And we were given those sacred gifts of knowledge, the sacred gifts of free will to protect that water. Water comes in so many forms, the wetlands, the groundwater. It comes from precipitation. We also acknowledge the various other forms of water the teachings have provided us on that seawater, the sweet water from that anatig, that sweet maple, the birth water that comes before a baby is born. So this was incredibly important for our knowledge keepers to reiterate, and for Mississauga and other First Nation informants to put forward that we need to protect the water, including those wetlands. Next slide. Commemoration placemaking, another really exciting highlight from the input of Indigenous peoples, that Trent will acknowledge that the campus as traditional territory through place names, through public art, and other placemaking elements. Of course, this isn't the place to detail some of these things, but we were fortunate enough to include some of that detail that will help guide, the future of our Trent lands. Trent will offer multiple ways to acknowledge and celebrate Indigenous traditional knowledge and Mississauga culture. This is just the beginning. This is the first time that Trent has incorporated Indigenous traditional knowledge into this kind of land use planning work. So there's lots to look forward to. And those opportunities for placemaking, I'm going to go into detail on those. New, adequate, dedicated space for ceremonies and gatherings, a beautiful thing. A new traditional teaching lodge. We heard that from some of our knowledge keepers, especially from Curve Lake. I don't know if she's on, but I don't want to name names, but this came from our elders. It's really beautiful. A contemporary roundhouse. So not just having a teaching lodge made of those anoktig, made of those saplings, but also a lodge that can be used year round, that might be heated, that include kitchen space, space for fire keepers, and all those things we need for our ceremonies and our gatherings. So that contemporary roundhouse. And of course, a more robust traditional medicine garden and food garden. I know one of the issues that some of our folks are talking about is those food gardens, but we're hoping that this will be an Indigenous food garden as well. So hopefully we'll see new space for that. Next slide. This is pretty exciting, and I really love the look at this. We think of when I first got involved with this project, we were coming off of a decision by the city of Peterborough to have those arena lands put in that place along Pioneer Road, and that was a lot of controversy there. What can we do to better address that controversy than to totally revert that idea and create beautiful new functional space for Indigenous cultural activities, for that learning, for that sharing, for our gathering. And this was one of a number of areas that the consultation officers and the elders and knowledge keepers were able to decide and talk and dialogue amongst themselves. And they felt that this would be a good space for that. And that's that space that's right next to that Camp Kawartha. There used to be a ball diamond there. I still think it's used in some ways. So this is a little diagram of what that could look like. It includes, look at along the Pioneer Road there on the left-hand side, a planting of new cedar trees that will provide that spacing, that provide that shelter and privacy for our ceremonies. You see the traditional teaching lodge there. That is our original teaching house. That was how we had celebrated life's moments. That's how we received our names. That's where we lit that sacred fire. So we want space. We'd like to see space to have that. So we heard that. There's a little mock-up of what the roundhouse can look like, but it doesn't necessarily have to look like a wooden structure like that. It can be a more elaborate modern building that's built to, the codes and those sorts of things that we need, but it could be enough to provide space for 4-season use. Again, Indigenous medicine gardens shown there. There's the cedar screening, hopefully more cedar spaces, and the connection to the Trent Nature Area lands and trails. And there's a poor deer standing there in the middle, just waiting to get in the food garden. So great space for gathering and for ceremony. Finally, the last slide I think I'm going to touch on is, how does Indigenous traditional knowledge and values really relate to the functional and practical decision-making that needs to take place? And one of the criticisms that we received is, we're not considering Indigenous peoples and Indigenous voices in decision-making. Well, we've entrenched this process into the Trent Lands Plan. And I'll try to take you through this as best I can. On the left-hand side near the top, we see the Trent Lands and Nature Areas Plan. So on the middle left-hand side, thank you very much. This is the framework that's going to provide, that framework for growth and stewardship of the campus. It makes reference in this plan, as you read through it, that Indigenous traditional knowledge baseline information that was provided by our knowledge keepers. Those will need to be updated from time to time, but that's where we start. So let's give a good example. Let's say we want to create a roundhouse in those locations. So we go into the site selection process. So we have that roundhouse. We have a great idea. You know, Indigenous people came together and decided, hey, this is what we'd like to see in the roundhouse. Where are we going to have it? Where is it going to be located so it's not going to affect provincially significant wetlands, not going to impact the turtles that live in that area, all of those things. So this is in the site selection process where we are going to engage the Mississauga directly through their consultation officers. Just like we did in this plan, we will go to them very early on when we have a decision to be made. We're going to consult the elders and traditional knowledge keepers for Indigenous knowledge advice with relation to that site selection. We'll convene those meetings so they can discuss those amongst themselves. So if, you know, those ideas come through and it looks like a good idea, then we get into the actual site plan application, which is towards the bottom left of the slide, where we start to get into those tech.
I think we may have lost Bob's internet connection. I'll just help fill in some of the gaps in case he's not able to rejoin. The site plan application process is where we get into the detailed technical site-specific study. And again, there's an opportunity to integrate site-specific Indigenous traditional knowledge through this process. Not only is that an opportunity, it is something that through the Trent Lands Plan, we are saying it is required for any future planning exercise. Bob's camera or connection failed just in time for me to take on our last highlight, and I'll try to be brief, cognizant of the time that we have available to us. And that's finding a secure future or home for the sustainable agriculture and food systems that are offered on campus. So we have been engaging with the Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems program and members of the growers group about impacts of current known constraints on the site on the university's farm assets. So we understand from the Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems group that the current experimental farm is not the most suitable location for long-term farming opportunities, as it's mostly wet and unsuitable for food production. And so there's an opportunity through this plan to find another location. Additionally, the MTO corridor, as I've mentioned before, presents a bit of a constraint for long-term prosperity of the farm. And for funding, securing funding opportunities, considering it compromises its long-term potential. The corridor itself, if it were to go through, would have a large impact on the farm area. And in the meantime, it prevents any other long-term initiatives on this part of the Trent Lands. Additionally, there's some planned street infrastructure in order to be able to improve connections to the river for wildlife and people on campus and in the adjacent nature areas. This north-south connection becomes quite critical. And as part of the Clean Tech Commons master plan, there is envisioned a road connection to the east bank on campus, which has an impact on the Trent Vegetable Garden. We have started and have been having continued conversations with both the Trent Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems, the School of Environment, and the Growers Group, and those conversations continue. And it is really Trent University's aim to increase its offerings on sustainable agriculture, both in its curriculum and in campus life. And so with the reimagination of the Trent campus comes a really significant opportunity to secure this future. And so understanding the current constraints on the lands we need to find a secure home that can allow this opportunity to flourish, that could allow for the students and other community members to grow food and medicine more spontaneously on the campus, at the experimental farm location, on rooftops, along streetscapes and orchard and other locations. The Trent Food and Farm, the experimental farm relocation is not intended to be in to replace natural features or to compromise natural features. And so this map here, what it indicates are already existing active farmlands within the Wildlife Sanctuary Nature Area that are accounted for in the 2002 Stewardship Plan, and that's been carried through in the 2020 draft Nature Area Stewardship Plan that is part of the Trent Lands and Nature Areas Plan. And so any relocation of farm assets would take place only on those farmlands that are currently active. It would, buffers from the hydrological features or, ensuring or farming practices are intended to be sustainable and regenerative. So we're anticipating that the shift will actually improve the quality of the farmlands that are in the nature areas and improve their impact on the adjacent natural features. Here's an example of what additional green spaces might look like on campus. You will have seen some opportunities for food production scattered in the Seniors Village sketch, or as well in the conversation about the peninsula lands. Here we imagine a space on campus directly that includes an arboretum or orchards for collecting some fruits, Indigenous plantings integrated alongside these opportunities to grow foods in a year-round greenhouse, seasonal programs and markets, a potential for outdoor kitchens and other activities that really promote harvesting, food collection, and growth on campus, and seasonal gardens and apiaries, of course, being part of that vision. To round this all up, I just have one slide as a reminder of the role of the Trent Lands and Nature Areas Plan. So it is not the final step in the planning process, but it is a very critical first step. It is a thoughtful understanding of the complexities and opportunities and uniqueness of the urban and natural environments. And what the plan does is it starts by building a base of the current conditions on the land through our understanding through environmental studies that are highlighted or summarized in the Natural Heritage Report, and through our review of the existing regulatory context and engagement outcomes out of phase 1 and phase 2, and a review of precedents. All of that translates into this vision for the future and the guiding principles and direction to move forward. So the Trent Lands and Nature Areas Plan articulates this vision and framework clearly and brings together the university's learning, environmental, community, and economic endeavors in a unified and holistic plan. It sets clear principles and standards for development in order to enable it to achieve this future vision with built-in flexibility to maintain adaptability as new information becomes available. Future detailed studies are required and will come in at various steps of the process. Site-specific projects and initiatives will go through their own visioning exercises and will be determined will be informed by this plan, but will be determined at a later date. And through this process, planning and design studies, environmental impact studies, transportation, servicing, and other studies will all be required to confirm details about the locations, delineation, boundaries, and buffering from any features on the land in order to ensure that the development proceeds in a sustainable and effective way that's consistent with the vision and the principles in the Trent Lands Plan. And monitoring will be required on an as-need basis as identified through these studies. Engagement and collaboration is not intended to stop here. It is intended to carry through all of these site-specific projects and initiatives. And today we're here to speak predominantly about this critical first step. And so with that, I will stop here and pass it back to Julie.
Okay, I think I'm back on. So difficult to do all of this when we don't see everybody. So thank you, Lena, Kristen, and Bob. We've been very, very fortunate to have such an experienced and committed team working on this plan. As we started the process, we were challenged by many on our campus and in the community to do better, to learn from challenges in past projects, and to set new standards that inspire others. In fact, no one we've spoken to have integrated environmental studies, Indigenous knowledge, and public engagement into one plan like we have. There are so many elements of this plan that respond to the calls for action, and I'm very excited about what we've put forward. We expect critical engagement on the plan. That's why we've published it as a draft for review, and we're keen to hear feedback to improve the plan, and especially on how we can successfully implement it. So now over to the Q&A portion of our program. A quick reminder of how this will work. We will start by answering questions that have been submitted in advance and throughout this presentation. So there have been a number that we received as people were registering for the session. And I think I see now 20 questions submitted throughout. If you now want to ask a question, use the Q&A feature at the bottom middle of your screen. And once we make good progress on the submitted questions, we will open the floor to any live questions. And at that point, use the raise your hand feature to get into the queue. We'll turn on your microphone and ask you to introduce yourself. And if you can, please keep your questions short, clear, and focused so that we can have the space to answer as many as possible. So I'll pass it over to Shonda Wang, who is principal with SVN Architects and Planners, who will moderate this session and who will also assist with some wrap up at the end. Over to you, Shonda.
Great, thanks, Julie. Okay, so as Julie mentioned, we do have lots of great questions here, and so I'll do my best to help moderate and help answer as many of these questions via the panelists and team here. So first question is about the wetlands, and I'll just read the question here. What will be done to protect natural spaces from development, especially the wetlands? Will unevaluated wetlands be evaluated? Lena, do you want to start and take that question, please?
Sure, thanks, Shonda. So part of what the Trent Lands Plan did is try to identify as a preliminary review the natural heritage features on campus and determine where from an early standpoint development should occur based on that information. So that's resulted in at least 4 development parcels being converted into nature areas based on the results of these field studies. So the more detailed field studies, as I mentioned, occurred on these previously designated development parcels. As projects and opportunities move forward from concept to planning stages, as I showed in the previous slide, an environmental impact study will be required, and so it will be commissioned to inform site planning, and that will determine both the limits of the natural feature and any necessary buffering from that feature. It will confirm also significance of any features. So the trigger for study for wetlands is 120 meters. So any development that occurs within 120 meters of a wetland is required by law to undergo this evaluation. And at that time, it would be confirmed as significant or not significant. In the meantime, our planning exercise has assumed that all wetlands are significant.
Great, thanks, Lena. Next question, Kristen, I believe this will be for you because it gets into some further detail, specifically around buffers from wetlands. And the question is, how are buffers from wetlands established, and why hasn't a 120-meter buffer been applied to existing projects like the Clean Tech Commons? Kristen?
Thanks, Shonda. Yeah, so I think it's a fair question. It's one that's come up a number of times, and there's an item for clarification as well as maybe a description around how buffers will be established. I know some of it was covered in the presentation, but I'll try and summarize a few items. So Lena mentioned in her response that 120 meters is commonly applied adjacent lands for natural features, and any proposed development or site alteration within that area would trigger further study. I think that is commonly misunderstood as being that's a recommended buffer that's put forward through provincial policy, and that's not the case. So I think that was just a point for clarification for everybody. We do acknowledge and totally, fully support the idea of ecological buffers and application of those. Buffers will be determined through site-specific studies. So once there's maybe a development that's proposed to move forward, there would need to be something like an environmental impact study that would go in and do a very detailed assessment of the wetland, considering hydrology, what features are present, what species are present, to assess the sensitivity of that feature in consideration of the adjacent development area, so that way we can, whoever's conducting that study in consultation with the regulatory agencies can establish what an appropriate buffer will be. So 120 meters isn't a typical buffer that is applied either. I think that's worth identifying. I've been engaged in projects that have gone anywhere from 15 meters for less significant wetlands, and then up from there. 30 meters is an often applied buffer. It's a common practice, and that is what's in the Clean Tech Commons. So it's not surprising to see something like that. But moving forward, the real objective here is to consider buffers as one component of mitigation. So thinking about what does the design look like, and can the design inherently avoid some of the impacts that might be normally presented by development, and then looking at that holistic approach to mitigation. So buffers being one piece and determined through that process, but in consideration of those other elements as well.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Kristen. Third question. Will there be changes to the funding of the Trent Nature Area Stewardship Advisory Committee to help tackle larger issues such as invasive species and experiential learning projects? Julie, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Great, thank you. And yes, right, that to ask that question, implementing the Nature Areas Stewardship Plan will require additional resources. There's currently a few endowed donor funds that support trail clearing in the canal and wildlife sanctuary nature areas, but they would not be sufficient to implement the plan. And certainly one of the goals of creating this document is to outline our goals and plans for the nature areas to attract the funding needed to achieve them. So the Nature Areas Stewardship Plan will be a philanthropic priority for the university's advancement team, and we hope that we can engage donors to, in effect, sponsor a nature area with enough funding to develop and implement the management plan for that area over the long term. I note it's also a priority to engage students in advancing the management plans for the nature areas, doing the field studies, developing the restoration plans, etc. And we do have already a small fund to kickstart that, and we'll work with the School of the Environment to identify ways that this work could be undertaken as part of field courses, placements, and the like. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Julie. I think we have a land use planner kind of question here. The question is, land use change literature calls for governance mechanisms that facilitate both relationship building and building of shared understandings of the landscape in question. So the question is, what qualitative analysis will get applied to the public feedback, and what is your plan for communicating these findings to the public after the feedback period? Lena, do you want to start with an answer to that?
Sure. So as I've mentioned through the presentation, there's been extensive feedback and dialogue with different groups, interests of stakeholders and right holders, and ensuring accessibility to participate in different ways through the website, email, through these types of sessions, and in focus groups and pop-ups on campus when we were able. In terms of building shared understanding of the landscapes, the Phase 1 and Phase 2 engagement reports are available on the website, outlining key messages and feedback received to date. The purpose of the Natural Heritage Report was to create a shared understanding of the landscape. So if anyone would like to go through that, that's also available on the website, and that includes a section on the regulatory context and requirements. And Indigenous history in this area has also been documented, and that's woven through the Phase 1 report and other aspects of the plan. The questions and comments that we're receiving through this final phase will also be shared. They're currently being shared quite regularly with our team, and we're trying to be quite responsive, meeting at a weekly basis to discuss any implications on the plan. Once we are ready to publish a final plan, we will also publish a report that outlines the feedback that we've received during this final stage. As I mentioned earlier, we've had over 131 comments so far through the website, so there's been quite a bit of engagement, and we're excited to see that so many people do value the plan. And so we'll continue to make the planning and Trent teams available for meetings on specific issues, such as some of the recent meetings we've had on the farm assets.
Great, thanks, Lena. Next question, it's about the plan to build an arena. And Julie, I think you might be best suited to answer this question, which is, where do things stand on the plan to build an arena jointly with the city? Would Trent develop the site on its own? What does the master plan show for development on this site? Julie?
Great, thank you. And I guess this relates to one of my earlier comments about we've had lots of learnings to bring into this process. So the city has decided to build their arena elsewhere and is currently working to secure a location within the city, and we don't have any plans to build an arena on our own. And as Bob noted, during the traditional knowledge workshop that we held in phase 1 of the process, an elder had suggested that site would be a great location for additional teaching lodge. We did have a Kwe from Hiawatha come and speak to members of the community and the campus about the traditional medicines in that area. And so we would envision a traditional medicine garden and teaching opportunities. And so we would work with the Mechisage, the First People's House of Learning, the Cheney Wenjack School for Indigenous Studies to advance that plan and to attract the funding we need to realize that vision. Thank you.
Great. Next question about, there's actually several questions here, so I'll just maybe start with the first couple. Does the master plan have more to say about the sustainable village other than that found on page 170 of the plan? If developed, would the university continue to own the peninsula lands and lease the space, or would the university sell it? Maybe let's start with the answering of those first two questions there, Lena.
Sure. So the sustainable village as presented in the master plan is an idea that's being carried forward from previous plans. The intent is to contribute to much needed housing in the city and to do it in a way that sets a standard. So an example that we've been looking to is the Simon Fraser University on Burnaby Mountain that showcases what might be possible on the peninsula lands. We would seek, regardless, I think the university through their campus planning processes would seek additional engagement, as I've outlined before, through any of the site planning initiative. So it is a high level, the Trent Lands Plan is a high level framework, and it's meant to guide and inform the future, but it hasn't gone into the site specific details or planning, which is why some of the content might appear to be a little bit limited. So it's intended to relay the vision and not particularly set the details for the development.
Okay, and so I guess there was another part of this question, I think. Could you expand on that a little bit? Would you then be getting into limits on development, such as height restrictions, that level of detail on built form parameters? Sure. So
there are sustainable design guidelines and other development guidelines that are set in the Trent Lands Plan, and detailed environmental studies have informed some of the configuration of the blob, but generally it's still a vague site location that needs to be confirmed through site-specific study, and those site-specific studies would include detailed environmental studies that would inform the feature limits, natural heritage locations, buffers from those locations, and locations of infrastructure and subsequently through that more detailed process, building heights would also be confirmed, and setbacks and all of those details that come through at a more site-specific stage would also be detailed. So the intent, sorry, I believe there was a question about whether Trent intends to lease or sell the land. I believe that through our conversations with Trent, and if I'm wrong, Julie can correct me, but I believe the intent is to maintain as much of Trent lands within Trent ownership, with a lease opportunity arranged with developers as an opportunity to secure and diversify the university's revenue.
Okay. Julie, anything to add to that, or did Lena?
No, Lena captured it all.
I was able to capture that. Great. Okay, next question is about the MTO corridor on the east side of the campus here. So the MTO corridor, I guess it's just more a question of what is it? Lena, could you answer that, please?
Sure, I touched on it lightly in the presentation on the framework plan that's on your screen over on the east end of the campus along the Douro 9th line. The Ministry of Transportation has reserved those lands for a potential future expansion of Highway 115. This is a designation that came up in the 1970s, and the university and city were not aware of it until recently while undergoing the Clean Tech Commons Master Plan. Through the application process, the Ministry of Transportation, being a commenting agency, made the city and Trent University aware of this land reserve. And so the reserve remains in Trent ownership, but while the lands are reserved, Trent or the city are not able to locate any permanent infrastructure within the corridor. And so the security or viability of any long-term initiatives along that corridor is compromised until confirmation of whether the highway is to go through or not. So that's really on the Ministry of Transportation to lift that designation or reserve on that portion of the Trent lands.
Okay, great. Next question. Question around Clean Tech Commons. Has the footprint of Clean Tech Commons changed? Lena, I'm going to direct this to you. I know you're a popular speaker here, but I think you're best positioned to maybe start the answer to the question.
Sure. So the footprint of Clean Tech Commons has not changed in terms of a size impact. But its configuration has had to change through our process. So the city and university have committed to an approximately 85-acre sized park, and that's been the commitment since the 2013 lands plan. That has not changed. The footprint has had to be revised to exclude the Ministry of Transportation corridor, which we just spoke to. Seeing as through zoning of those lands, there's no opportunity to zone that portion of the lands or permit any potential development there. And it also accounts for actually, and I think a bigger impact, the accommodation of the Nassau Mills wetland complex, which came up through detailed environmental study and the ecological buffers associated with that. So all of those identified features through more detailed study and through review with different agencies have required that the land configuration be adjusted through this process. And so that's the footprint that you see here on this plan.
Great, thanks, Lena. Next question reads as, the changes to the nature areas are confusing. What happened to the Highway 28 nature areas, and what baseline did you use for calculating the increase to the nature areas to this plan? Julie, can you answer that question, please?
Sure, thank you. And I recognize a lot of interest in this question. We all have a great deal of value placed on the nature areas. So the Highway 28 Woods Nature Area is located on the west side of Water Street, and it appeared in the 2006 Endowment Lands Plan. It was transferred to the city of Peterborough as part of the Water Street Residence Plan approval as designated protected natural area and corridor in the city's official plan, and that took place in 2010. Now, when the 2013 Trent Lands Plan update was completed, that was a desktop exercise. So unfortunately, the people involved in that were not, that included me, were not at Trent in 2010. And so that change hadn't been picked up at the time. The 2020 planning update that we've gone through has captured the detailed boundary calculations for the Trent lands. So it's been a detailed exercise that through that process identified that was information that needed to be updated. So that's why that appeared and then didn't appear. So it is still in the city official plan as protected natural area and corridor, and is the same designation in the draft city official plan. And so there are a number of pages throughout the plan where you can take a look at the nature areas boundaries, and we'll continue to assist people if there's still confusion in trying to produce maybe a series of maps explaining that. But I think the net takeaway is, as Kristen said, there's a number of developable areas that are now confirmed as nature areas because of the presence of natural heritage, and that's really what the focus is to make sure that we're protecting the natural areas. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Julie. Next question. What is the rationale for locating the seniors village on the extreme northwest corner of the university campus? Would it not be better to closer integrate seniors with university students? Lena, can I pass that to you?
Yes, sure. Through our work with the university, there was an identified desire to maintain the campus core for academic buildings, student housing, and core campus servicing. And so initiatives that are primarily community infrastructure are generally located outside of this campus core. That's just been part of the direction that we've been moving ahead with. And so that really strengthens the academic core of the campus, and it keeps everything within a walkable distance. Initiatives that can be capitalized on sooner than later require servicing. And so the availability of servicing on different parcels of land is a factor that contributes to the location of additional so servicing and transportation access, are factors that contribute to the identification of sites for additional initiatives. So the size of the core campus is already limited by the natural features around it. And so taking that into consideration with current bus routing opportunities, access to road infrastructure and servicing, the Seniors Village location seemed to be a desirable one through that analysis. It's important to understand that servicing is such a critical factor in whether or not we can capitalize on these opportunities and get housing in the market now, rather than have to wait until appropriate investment is available, because it does provide a bit of a constraint in terms of financing and actual viability of a development.
Great, thanks, Lena. Next question is in regards to the Trent Vegetable Garden and apiary, and specifically what's happening with it. Julie, do you want to start and take that question, please?
Sure, great, thank you. And as we said in the plan, we're all very excited about the opportunity for enhanced agriculture throughout the campus, and particularly the urban gardens that we might be able to place throughout the campus, so that students interact more regularly with gardens, as well as the academic and research leadership that we envision for Trent and that we want to support. So the challenge is the requirement to reserve the MTO corridor requires Trent to plan for a road that exits Clean Tech Commons to the East Bank. And the preliminary engineering drawings show that road would affect the Trent Vegetable Garden. There is no time frame for the construction of this road. It's not imminent, but again, part of what we're trying to do with the framework plan is to anticipate future challenges, constraints, and opportunities, and try to make the best decisions we can. And so in this case, while we would need site-specific studies to confirm the final route, it is prudent to consider options for the Trent Vegetable Garden and the apiary that protect them from the future impacts and ensure that they can thrive. So there have been two considerations that we've talked about with the student growers. That is the value of accessibility to these spaces within the core campus versus the potential to consolidate Trent's farm assets for synergies and access to resources. And so one idea in the plan is moving the Trent Vegetable Garden to where the Trent farm assets would be relocated south of Pioneer Road onto the existing farmland. But we also continue to explore other options on the core campus to keep it close and accessible. I think the key point is that we have committed the resources and the support needed to prepare the land and relocate the farm, and the timelines for that would be developed with the growers and ensure that everything is there to make sure that such a transition would be seamless. And that's, again, the point of the framework plan is to look at all of these possible impacts and try to make good decisions over the long term. Thank you.
Great, Julie. And I know there were a few questions here about around the vegetable garden, and so you've been able to answer those questions. Thank you. Next question for Bob, actually. Bob, have Curve Lake First Nations and Hiawatha First Nations been engaged? And second part to that question is whether Trent Elders Council have been consulted.
Thanks, Shonda. And, you know, I point out that even before we started embarking on this plan, we reached out to those First Nations. In fact, they were involved in the choosing of this consultant team and the archaeology team. So, you know, right from the beginning, they were involved. But we definitely made an effort to create a process that will allow for that ongoing engagement and to build the relationship, build that trust, to address some of those missteps that were taken and some of those criticisms that Trent received. So that required that ongoing relationship. And, you know, it was certainly Hiawatha First Nation and Curve Lake First Nation that stepped up and said they would participate, and they were incredibly great collaborators. But I just want to make the point too that we also included Alderville First Nation and Mississaugas of Scugog, but those First Nations said, hey, these two First Nations are more proximate, they would be involved on a regular basis. So we had an ongoing relationship there. The Elders and Traditional Knowledge Keepers Council was created in part to inform the Indigenous traditional knowledge aspects of this plan. And again, they were they were incredibly instrumental in how that Indigenous traditional knowledge was used, how we were able to find that data. And those knowledge holders actually took part in the traditional knowledge study. So we're glad to see that one of the legacies of this Trent Lands Plan process is going to be that Trent University has an Elders and Traditional Knowledge Keepers Council. That's incredibly important. Finally, you know, that we've got a firm voice that will always be there to inform and advise the president, advise leadership on ongoing land use issues or ongoing other issues. So really great, and I really enjoyed working with not only the leaders and the consultation officers from the First Nations, but definitely the Elders and Traditional Knowledge Keepers Council. Miigwech.
Great, thank you so much, Bob. Next question. Here we go. Okay. It says the road connects, it says the Green Tech Common, but I believe maybe this is meant to say Clean Tech Common, to County Road 32. Instead of using the existing 9th line, can you please explain why you would create the new road that causes further substrate disturbances and through agricultural land, leaving a narrow of agricultural land between the 9th line and the new road? This is in reference to the indicative street that's shown in the framework plan. Lena, could you answer that question, please?
Sure thing. So the distance actually between the 9th line and the closest north-south road currently being Nassau Mills is quite substantial. So for any land planning process to have access to servicing, to have access to an adequate and comprehensive integrated grid network, a refinement of the blocks is needed. And so We've indicated it conceptually on this plan. Admittedly, I am not a transportation planner and we do not have a detailed transportation study here, but we know from experience that a road connection would be needed, especially if we were to relocate the Nassau Mills Road away from the edge of the river. And that's seen as a greater priority because it does have critical improvements, or it does really help to connect some of the natural features that are directly adjacent to the water course and the river, with the river being a migratory route for many of them. It could help to reduce wildlife mortality and improve connections to the river. Additionally, relocating that road would reduce the amount of stormwater runoff going into the river, and it could help to mitigate potential flooding impacts as climate change starts to change our landscape and our and the way that our rain systems work, their intensity and their frequency. And so that road would really be critical for transportation and circulation on campus. It's not intended to be designed as a major thoroughfare. We did talk about the complete street strategy, and so it would be intended to minimize the pavement, increase the amount of trees, street trees and landscaping along the trees, potentially include low impact development measures. So it is intended that even new road infrastructure would be presented or added in a way that it improves sustainability on campus.
Great, Lena, thank you. Just looking at the time, I think we can maybe squeeze in one, maybe two more questions. Let's see how we go here. Next one, top of mind for everyone, is the pandemic, of course. And so the question is, could you please address how this plan has adjusted in the last 8 months to the pandemic, and how this plan can address the likely changes that we are going to face in post-secondary education in the next decade? It's a big question. I wonder, Julie, if you might be able to start to respond to this, and if others have other thoughts on this, please chime in. Julie?
Can you restate that? Because I was
Sure
using multi-tech here to feed the questions to each other.
Yes. No, it's a big question, and it's about the Trent Lands Plan and how it may have adjusted in the last 8+ months or so while we've been in the midst of the pandemic. If there's elements of the plan that can address the likely changes that we're going to face as post-secondary education just evolves really in the next decade.
I'd say that the first piece is it really has highlighted the imperative of Trent being successful. So certainly in my regular calls with community leaders, they are looking to Trent to continue to be the economic driver that it has been for 54 years. And that we need to be strong in order to make the rest of the community strong. And again, one value and role of this plan is that the leased land creates a revenue stream to enable Trent to be successful. And just for people's understanding, Ontario funding for post-secondary is the lowest across the country. There is very limited opportunities for us to address what is now due to COVID-19 a deficit in our budget through any other means. And so it's really important, and this is how many other universities across the country have generated funds for research, for new infrastructure and innovations, is through appropriate land leases that are endowed and then support that long-term sustainability of the university. So I'd say the most significant impact has been to highlight how critical it is that we are able to thrive as a university, and that this plan contributes substantially to that community success. I'd say the second thing is, again, the role of partnerships in making this happen. As we look around to things like the Seniors Village, the need for residential housing, how do we help those other agencies and community partners who are so vital in preparing those services to the community, who are really strained now financially and capacity-wise through COVID? How do we work with them to bring these plans to reality? The community infrastructure are not our ideas, they're the community's ideas that we're responding to. And so it just highlights how important it is for us to be responsive as quickly as we can in the most appropriate locations.
Great, thanks, Julie. You know, I know we're really tight on time, but we do want to answer some patient hands here that have been up for a little bit. Susan Chow, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, and thanks for being so patient. I know
No,
you've had your hand up.
okay. Okay, so my question is, it takes about 10 years to actually develop the soil for farming. And I know that the existing experimental farm has been working on the soil, and it's getting to a stage where actually it's producing. But now that you've moved it into an area that's next to the wildlife sanctuary, that if left alone, it would eventually, it could quickly revert back to like an old field. So instead of locating it there, why wouldn't you guys consider locating it near the Bolton homestead? Because I think the Bolton homestead, if you locate it there, you can actually, they also have structures there that will allow you to actually maybe develop or create a center of sustainable agriculture for the Peterborough County. It's a historical site. It's well, like Duro Dummer is an agriculture community, and you can actually build a community I don't know, interactions. And then also, because of the pandemic, there's been a lot of concerns about food security. And if we actually promote a center of sustainable agriculture at Trent, we can actually redefine the image of Peterborough County, as well as you know, create new food-based business in Peterborough. It's a win-win situation for a lot of people, and I know that you can argue that the Bolton homestead, it will be too expensive to actually work on it until, like, so that you can actually use it. But through fundraising and the support from the community, I believe it's workable. Can somebody comment on that?
Great, thanks, Susan. I know that food security has been a topic really and a key theme that has been raised from the very start of consultation and engagement in the process. I wondered if, Julie, could you respond to Susan's question, please?
Yes, thank you, Susan. And I think the idea of reusing existing facilities is an important one as well from an environmental and reuse perspective. And I think you're right, there's tremendous opportunity and a lot of great work going on with the community around agriculture. And I'd say we share those aspirations, and that's a great suggestion that we'll look at. I think it's you know, trying to find how those existing assets can be repurposed and celebrate the heritage of them at the same time would be a great addition to the plan. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Julie. Matt, another patient hand here. Matt, do you want to pose your question, please?
Oh, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Great. You note that a report will be published after the feedback period closes, outlining the feedback received. What does said outlining entail? And will all of the comments in their raw form be published? And further, what resolution mechanisms are in place to foster the building of shared understandings and ameliorate any of the substantiated concerns? Thank you.
Good question. Thanks, Matt. Lena, can you speak to that, please, about reporting mechanisms, how the consultation and engagement maybe has been documented so far, and also what will be happening as part of our next steps?
Sure. So typically in a report, what we would do is we would highlight any key themes. We would highlight messages that we're hearing loud and clear, like we would do at the end of a session like this. We would do a report back. We would just make clear, you know, what we're hearing from the public, and it's an opportunity for everyone who's been engaged to review that report and identify any discrepancies that may have been missed. So it's not intended that that's the end of the stage. So if you have a look at the phase 2 report, if there's anything that you feel wasn't captured in the phase 2 report, it's critical for us to know, and there's an avenue through the website for you to provide your comments for that. Matt, as you're aware already, with any specific concerns, we've been forming some focus group conversations. And so we've been having more detailed conversations on specific issues with interest groups. So the growers group being one of those. We just met recently since release of this plan with the growers group, and our intent is to meet again. We've been preparing for this town hall, and so once this milestone passes, we'll be sure to meet with you again. We have heard a lot of the comments and concerns from members of the growers group about the desire for food security and the access to farm assets. And so it is our intention to connect before this commenting period is over, so that we get it right in the final plan.
Great, thank you.
That helps to answer the question there.
Matt, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Lena.
My pleasure.
Great. Okay, so just looking at the time and also just doing a bit of a scan here on participants, I don't see any other raised hands, and I know I'm impressed we were able to get through so many questions in that last 40 minutes or so. So thank you all for your questions, and I know we didn't, if we didn't answer all of your questions in full, just do know for sure that we have been taking notes throughout the entire session. As Lena just shared, we will be producing a consultation and engagement summary, and that will be shared and published and available for all. I believe, Julie, you'll also share about some next steps here in terms of timelines for seeking feedback, et cetera, just before you close. And so, you know what, maybe I'll do, just given the time, Julie, I think that I'll pass it to you to talk about some of the next steps and provide some closing remarks.
Great, thank you. That's no mean feat to be responding to questions in that way, and there's definitely more questions that we're keeping track of on the Q&A than we were able to answer. And so we will add the answers to those on the frequently asked questions page of our website. And so that becomes a way that everybody can see the questions and the answers. And again, remember that you can submit questions and feedback directly on the website and to the Trent Lands Plan email. And that's really helping us. Again, we publish this as a draft. There's lots of areas where I think people might now have some new ideas or new thoughts as they see everything come together. So there will definitely be changes to the final plan influenced or inspired or directly related to that feedback. So thank you again, everybody, for your time and interest. We definitely have a great opportunity ahead of us, but with many challenges and roadblocks that we'll creatively overcome. Again, the key thing is understanding the principles and the goals and what we're trying to accomplish, so that as a long-term framework plan, as we move into specific initiatives or specific challenges, we have that guidance and we have the relationships that we developed and the mechanisms to resolve these together. So all of the draft materials, the presentation from tonight, summary sheets that we have created are on the website. We will also continue over the next month to put some more information up where we see a sequence of questions or a particular area where we think it would be useful to provide the information a different way or elaborate. Again, we want to make sure that the information is as helpful as people as possible as they consider it. Thank you again. It has been a very challenging, interesting, inspiring process to go through, and there's a lot of passion for Trent Lands. We all, I think, are here because we care very deeply about our environment, our community, and Trent. So thank you so much in the spirit of that for all of your involvement. Good night, everybody.